Thanks, Matthew. That was fascinating. Okay, hopefully that has sort of set the scene for this section. Hopefully lots of those points that you've brought up are going to be kind of captured and elaborated on as we move through this section. This next section, which is all about from station to place. So thanks, Matthew. And hi, everyone. I'm Rosie Haslam. I'm Managing Director of Street Sense UK. As Jonathan mentioned, we're a sister company to CBRE. We offer strategic consultancy around place, so place repositioning, place visioning, place branding, and place making. So place is very much in my heart and in my everyday work. So delighted to be moderating this section. So I'm going to be kicking off with a case study of some work that my company have done in New York for Grand Central Station. That's for the Metropolitan Transportation Authority of New York City. We're then going to be moving through Madhu Mehta and Martin Phillips of East West Rail are going to be talking about their work across the portfolio of East West Rail stations and how actually you can craft unique identities for each of those stations based upon a really deep understanding of the individuals that are using those stations. And we're then going to, lastly, in this section, we're going to have Ross Crawford from the Design Council, who's going to be talking through the Design Academy guide training guidance that they provide, and in particular their work with Network Rail, to really try and instill a knowledge and deep understanding of the value of design into their work and into their work around particular stations. So hopefully you can see a common thread that falls through all of today's talks. If there is time at the end, we're going to have a group panel Q&A. I have a feeling that we might run over. So if we don't have a chance, then come and chat to us at lunchtime, save up your questions and talk to us after, or get our contact details. But we may have a quick moment at the end to kind of try and bring everyone together and have a bit of a chat. Okay, so how responsive? Okay, so from station to place or from station to destination. So I'm going to be talking about, as I say, our work with the MTA of New York on Grand Central Station. I'm going to kick off just by quickly touching on the word place itself. I know it's key to this whole section of today. It's also, I think, really key to define it as I mean it, but I think in the context of today to really differentiate it from the word space, and I'll talk through that a bit in a moment, and why it's particularly important in a post-COVID world, but also in the context of stations and transport. I'm then going to talk through the case study itself, what the challenges the station was facing, and how we sort of developed a strategy to help them move forward, and then end on a couple of key learnings that hopefully some of you can integrate into your own projects. So, Grand Central Station, there it is, in New York. I'm sure many of you know it well. Is it a place or is it just a station? So, I always like to really differentiate between space and place, to say place is more than space. Space is very much a physical entity. Place is what happens when you add people to it. And critically, you add people who actually can find real meaning to it. So how do you craft something that really resonates with individuals and is more than just a space? This space is very much a physical entity, a square footage. Place is the kind of the quality rather than the quantity. It's what happens within that square footage. And I think why this is more key than ever is, people are being more discerning than ever about how and where they spend their time, also how and where they spend their money. And if we don't craft something that resonates, then they're not going to come and use it. And again, one step further, this is even more important for all of our railway stations and interchanges, because as we know, one of the biggest kind of outcomes of COVID is people are commuting less. Naturally, they're working from home more. So how do we get people to commute more? Or even if we don't get them to commute more, we have to accept that there is a different dynamic going on in our stations. Commuter levels are down, largely the raison d'etre of our stations to kind of even exist. But there's also an opportunity in that. What happens when those visitor flows or passenger flows decrease? There's an opportunity to actually integrate other people, other users into those spaces. Perhaps if they're not commuting, you've actually got a local population that can use it in different ways. So challenges, yes, but also opportunities. And in many ways, necessities as to how we better use these stations and as places. Because really, these terminals, by their very nature, have potential to be places. They are crossroads of mass movement, created to facilitate the movement of different people coming through, but actually in that through moment, there's a moment that they could pause, they could interact, they could transact. Sadly, many of these places are no longer about that, or rather, they are no longer places. In the kind of 20th century drive for efficiency, They are mere touch points along a journey. They're not places to stop. It's a stop off. It's not even a stop off point. People are coming from one place to another, and the station is just the facilitating entity. But it doesn't have to be like that, and actually it wasn't always like that. And this is where Grand Central Station is a real case in point. So Grand Central Station, heart of Manhattan, built or completed in 1913, and this is an image, I thought it was a really lovely image, of in its very early days. It was a destination, it was a real place, as well as facilitating the movement. It was a centre, it was at the centre of Manhattan, and it was for people of Manhattan, as well as just commuters. So it had a theatre, it had a cinema, it had an art gallery, it had shops. It was at the heart of the city, and there was a lovely quote I read about it. It said, it's a palace at the end of the journey. And so people would come en route to somewhere, but also they'd come independently. In and of itself, it was a place. Even further throughout the centuries, this is in the 1960s, thought another really lovely image. So this is when astronaut Glenn was being launched into orbit. This is hundreds and hundreds of office workers who worked in the vicinity came downstairs to witness collectively this launch into orbit on the big screen. Admittedly, nowadays, you'd all be watching it in the office in your own cubicle on your phone, but this is a moment for people to come together. This is, making memories collectively in the centre of a city, being used for something other than just commuter traffic, those kind of time-poor commuters rushing through, and that's this mentality we have about stations. They can be more than that, and they can serve different people at different times of day, and what a magical moment that was. Grand Central Station then declined. And that's natural, that's inevitable, over time, over the century, it kind of became quite an unloved place. No investment, no strategy really as to how to bring it up to date. Over time, as we all know, this happens with many of our places, many of our assets. There's kind of retail vacancy and an ongoing cycle of decline. So yes, it was still somewhere where people had to travel through. Yes, it had a few shops. Yes, it had a few kind of F&B and retail, but it wasn't really a really meaningful place. Of course, it had the grandeur of the architecture, but it was unloved, it was in decline. So the MTA, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, came to us at Street Sense and said, can you help us? How do we restore the identity and restore the value of this place in the heart of the city and make it more than what it currently is? Ultimately to drive economic productivity, but also just through the pure value of having this amazing place. We said, yes, of course we can. This is exactly the sorts of thing that we want to work on, but we have to start with the users. We have to start by understanding the people this is for, both currently, but potentially. How can we make this an even better place for the rich diversity of people who come through this station? So we started by saying, well, who are the users? And I will say, actually, this piece of work we carried out just before the pandemic. So we are now actually revisiting it to kind of carry out that analysis again, because the data has obviously changed. The shift in numbers, but also proportions of different people naturally has changed post-pandemic. But the trends that we're already showing are fascinating in and of themselves and certainly drove our original strategy. So what you can see here are these are the different people flows within the station in 2018. What you can see, daily foot traffic, the column on the right, the bar on the right, the orange one, is non-commuters. So even pre-pandemic, over 50% of the people using the station every day were not there as commuters. So fascinating. It's already a place, it's already serving a diverse population. So really our strategy had to be about how do we make it even better and how can we can drive those numbers even more. So who were those people? Well, first up, and sorry if this is a bit small, I'll try and explain it as best I can. Okay, so this is the commuter traffic. So we know that we can predict who these people are, what are they about, how are they using the station. Fairly predictable, but still a really key proportion of the population. So we've got on the left metro riders, and in the middle we've got the Long Island Railroad riders. And what you can see on the right, this is the graph of how they activate the place across the day and week. So fairly predictable, morning and evening peak in the rush hour. That's how they're flowing through the station. So we understand them, we have to understand them in order to craft a strategy to optimise for those users. But who else is using it? And this is what's really interesting, as you can see, do I have a pointer? No pointer. In the middle of the graph, that big chunk of people, those are visitors, tourists, people who don't need to be there, but they want to be there. How many of you have been to New York? How many of you have been to Grand Central Station? Okay, great. So you have been part of that chunk. Probably not a hugely representative neutral sample because this is a room of infrastructure people. However, you get the point. This is a destination, but how can we make it even better? So, and what you can see is actually the visitor population, all of us, we're activating at a completely different time of day as the commuters. This is great. This is an ecosystem that is being activated by different people at different times of day. But I'll also ask, how many people lingered for much longer than going in and kind of seeing the amazing, this is the mural on the ceiling, and there's obviously the grand ticket hall. There's not much to do beyond that. You walk in, you see it, you feel like you're in the film. There's not much more. I personally, when I've been there, I would love to have stayed around for a coffee, but there's none of that. So this is where that difference between it's somewhere you want to go, but they don't have the facilities to kind of make you stay and make it into a real destination. Other users, nearby employees. So as I mentioned earlier, in the 1960s, these are the guys who come down to see the big screen. Nowadays, they're still using it, and you can see on the graph, they're kind of popping by on their way to and from work, might pop down for lunch in the middle of the day. But actually, how can we make it an even better place? It's on their doorstep. How do we compete with what's going on around in the external streets? And then lastly, I think really interesting category, and this is the category I think we need to be thinking about even more going forward for all of our stations, local residents. So again, on their doorstep, but at a totally different time of day, these people can activate and use this place. The evenings, on the weekends. This is a resource, this is an asset that can be open and used for local residents. How do we better use that going forward? So really this deep understanding of these users is what drove our strategy. And really, what's quite different to many of the other strategies we do, which are kind of in mixed-use environments, is saying there's already a temporality to our users, particularly around the commuters. And so actually we started developing a strategy about understanding how and when are people using this space and how much time do we have to capture them and to optimise their experience. So the capture windows, particularly for the commuters, is fascinating. They're only ever going to have 5 minutes. So how do we make them the best 5 minutes possible? So 5 minutes to come in just before their train or just after their train. They're going to have very specific needs. They want grab and go. We need to provide those options and the best version of them. They're going to have specific needs. They're going to want a Pret. They're going to trust it. They want to know they can get it in time for their train. Where do we locate it? We developed a strategy around where we position those kiosks to optimise the grab and go offer. You've then got the commuters or the travellers who maybe have 30 to 60 minutes. They arrive early for a train. Currently, there's limited seating. There's not really very good quality environment in which they're sitting. How do you optimise that experience? And maybe it is just great seating, great lighting, power, Wi-Fi, kind of the base level great experience. But there's an opportunity there for a great coffee. You could sit and have a lovely coffee and watch the world go by in this beautiful space. That's kind of the next level. There's also retail. These people are killing time. So how do you make them the best version of killing time? Is that experiential retail? Is it kind of convenience goods that people pick up? We all often pop into a Boots before we get on a train. That's kind of the base level. There's then the next level. Could we have some amazing other kind of experiential amenities? So those are all the people who need to be there anyway. So they need to be there to get a train. How do we make that a good experience? The next level, and this is where I think it's a really lovely example of the Changi Airport, how do we make people want to be there? That's where we move it from a place to a destination. People don't need to go to Changi Airport, those locals, but they want to. They can go and use it when they don't even need to. And this is when we get into those categories of, the visitors, so all of us wanting to go and see the ticket hall. But how are we captured and stay for longer? And we kind of linger and pause over a coffee. We can read. We can, you have a special moment. You go and have a glass of champagne. It's, the example of the champagne bar in St Pancras. It extends your visit. You get to enjoy it for even longer. The local workers, we're competing with potentially a canteen in their office, or the Pret on every corner in Manhattan, like here in the UK. How do you make them want to come and spend their lunch break downstairs in Grand Central Station? To arrange to meet a friend for a drink after work in Grand Central Station, create an amazing bar there so they activate that in the evenings. And then, as I said, that really interesting group of locals. This can provide their local grocery store. How amazing if you go to your, don't go 3 blocks away to a Whole Foods, come to a Whole Foods in Grand Central Terminal. Really beautiful. Provide some neighbourhood restaurants, people popping out for dinner on an evening, on a weekend. You can do that in Grand Central Terminal. And also then that final category of Manhattanites in general. It doesn't have to be immediately local, but how can you have real destination dining in this beautiful space? Again, in the similar way to what St Pancras is doing in London. It's a destination. You can go there when you don't need to, but how do we make you really, really want to? So our strategy was really all around building out really detailed proposals as to every type of amenity, every type of F&B, for all these different categories of people, even supplying kind of ideas around the actual brands and tenants to bring in. And then other sorts of amenities like neighbourhood services, hitting into the kind of health and wellness trends about what sort of services and amenities do we put on that front. And then lastly, just so it was a really executable strategy, was actually spatialising that for the MTA, saying, here are all your units, this is where you need to locate all of these different services, based both upon their location within the build, unit size and layout, but also in terms of leases. We knew when all the leases were going to be up, so we timed it and said, well, actually, these are your priorities, this is what you can start phasing in. This was pre-pandemic. The pandemic came, everything obviously went on pause. Lots of this we thought, is this ever going to be implemented? And kind of ironically, sadly, happily, maybe, post-pandemic, they know they need this more than ever. So whilst they're enthusiastic about the strategy before, now it's not even a choice. They know that they can't afford not to implement this sort of strategy, this sort of thinking. And I think this is what Ross is going to talk through with the example about the Design Council training, is it's embedding this idea around the value of this way of thinking. You then can't think otherwise. So we are revisiting the data, we're revisiting the recommendations, because obviously the world has changed slightly, but the principles are still the same. How do we create a place around people and their different needs and develop a strategy with that in mind? We're now also rolling this out on a couple of other stations that the MTA have across Manhattan, because again, they see the value, and more than ever they need to craft a strategy and places that really work for people. So very quickly, key takeaways at the end. I think it's really, whatever your asset is, if you guys are working in the world of sort of managing stations or thinking about some of these places and challenges you're facing in infrastructure, is really think about the users, your current users, but also the potential users. How can you diversify the sorts of people that are coming to use your place, that can activate it across the day, across the week? People who currently would never even come to use a station, locals who are sort of sitting at home, this can be an amazing space for them throughout the day, throughout the week. And really understand them, what's going to resonate, and craft the strategy around that. Okay, I had a couple of other examples, but I think in general we're running a bit over time today. So a couple of beautiful examples, hopefully they all speak for themselves, but examples of stations where they do things really well, that they're more than just a station, they're a place and a destination. So as I say, we're running over a little bit, so my contact details are up there if anyone wants to contact me, and we can also come and approach me at lunch or whatever if you want to chat.